Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Chatting with Asta. And as you have watched this show or listened to this show, it's basically my way of staying sane during lockdown. Talking to people from all over my life, people that inspire me from the arts and beyond. This week, my guests are Terence Krey and Christine Nyland. And I'm really excited to talk to this duo. They're really awesome. And you probably know that I'm really into duos like this. And yeah, welcome to the show, guys.
Thank
you for
you. Thanks for having us.
This is exciting.
Yes, it's Halloween. We're recording on Halloween, which is my favorite week of the year. So you guys have any spooky plans? You doing anything special?
Probably just movies at home and pumpkins.
Yeah, I'll probably dress up for something, for the mirror, and then just kind of look at myself in the mirror and be like, that's great. And then just go back into my bed, and that'll be that.
I know that Jamie Lee Curtis is doing like a Halloween parade. So if you wanted to film that moment, yeah, you can you can film it. All you have to do is like walk from like, I think left to right and then tag her.
Oh, and then they all get strung together.
Yeah.
Oh, that's actually
That's
cool.
amazing.
Yeah, I'm pretty, there's all these like online costume contests and things like that. And it's like the Halloween that's on a full moon and Saturday, so it's gotta.
I know it could have been a big one. Could have been a big one.
Yeah, but speaking of movies, you guys, I just checked out your film, An Unquiet Grave, and I can't stop thinking about it. I mean, it's the time of the year where it's like you're watching all the spooky stuff, and I've been watching a lot more like of the Edgar Allan Poe. Roger Corman, Vincent Price stuff. So just thinking about like, the way that we handle grief and the way that we push things down or avoid things. And that seems to be something that you guys like to explore in your work, like trauma, grief, how we handle ourselves. Do you want to talk about like the inception of this whole story?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we often come back to when we are starting is like, what is the relationship? Because especially when you have like a small cast of people, which we usually do because we're like working on an indie level, you want a relationship that's like has enough meat to it that it can get you through an entire film, right? And then the other thing that really came up in this one was like the Orpheus myth and sort of which is always presented in this like very romantic light. This guy like goes into the underworld to get his love back. But we really were a little bit like, well, what else is that guy willing to do though? Right?
Yeah. And I feel like the grief aspect of it, again, to Christine's point, like came kind of secondary to creating an interesting relationship around, a widower and then, the lost wife's sister. And that's such an interesting, we felt like there was so much kind of going on there. And then I feel like came trying to bring her back, and then came, what ends up happening in the film, and just thinking about like these kind of two characters and what they're going to go through, and the Orpheus myth, and also just like, what's something deeply allegorical, but, interestingly supernatural and different. I feel like, I think the bringing someone back, very, very common, but I'm so grateful how differently we made it.
Well, it's this thing where you mix all this be careful what you wish for kind of sense, but then also like, what is bringing someone back when the cost is what it is, I feel like the only way that we kind of reckon with those sort of stories is if we add the science fiction aspect and we decide it's time travel, and so therefore like things have been undone and like it's all whatever. But you guys you're doing rituals, you have like these intense moments. It's this I hope I'm saying the word correctly, palpable like tension between the characters where you're like, I mean, how do you measure grief with people, like a spouse versus a sibling, like who deserves to feel it more intensely, and like had this person asked the other person to make that sacrifice, like would she have? Like and so you guys like if people are afraid to ask that, and I think these themes are always important, but especially now we're living in a country where people they're given muted grief because of the pandemic and everything. No matter how people die right now, we can't see them, and so
Yeah.
the process of grief has been a sort of extended thing.
Yeah. And I think that's I think you bring up a really interesting point of like, yeah, if Jamie would have asked Ava, you know, and not manipulated her and not lied to her, what would have that answer been? And also, yeah, like, you know, the sister and the husband and that thing. It's so, I mean, we're getting into spoiler territory immediately, but yeah, I think, you know, I don't know, that for some reason I'm reminded of, I remember in the writing process, I always, like, I feel like Christine, we would like, not fight, because we never fight, ever. But I feel like I would always have such a like pit in my stomach of feeling how terrible, like, oh, we never actually give these, like, we bring who we bring back, right? But we never give these sisters an actual moment together. And that's so dissatisfying. That's so upsetting. And I feel like, you know, so much of this film is dealing with the consequences of it, and that like, yeah, like that's because that's the reality of the story. Like, yeah, there is something not cathartic about it, and deeply like kind of tragic about it. I don't know if that's really an answer to well, I don't know, that's just what came up.
Yeah, no, there are no wrong or right answers. These
Right.
aren't really questions, they're more musings. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, Christine, and you had to really balance playing these two sisters, which feel like, you know, two sides of the same coin, but then like, you know, I got to watch it at night stream, which was a very interesting experience. And then I got to have got to go and watch your virtual Q&A and got my question asked and everything. And I thought it was really cool how you said that you explored temperatures and like that kind of thing, because yeah, these people are two different, but then they're also literal life and death. You want to talk about like what, I mean, that those distinctions are so important for this story.
Yeah, I mean, well, and I think first and foremost, they're sisters, right? So it's interesting as an actor because you're trying to play two different characters who are very similar people.
Yeah.
So there's no sort of going to the like 1.0, like, oh, this one's like really like this, and this one's really over here. And so, yeah, I just tried to find sort of binaries for them to operate within that were a little more energetic and less sort of mannerism based or I don't know. Yeah, I tried to go a little bit more energetic with it because, yeah, they did grow up together and they are twins and they were very, very close. And so they do have a lot in common.
Yeah.
So the differences had to be like deeper, but they also still had to be really palpable for the audience.
Yes. And there were definitely some of those moments. No spoilers. I'll try to avoid the spoilers. The thing is that
no spoilers except the spoilers.
We're totally in spoiler territory.
You know, the thing is that I do this thing, and you guys, because you're storytellers, I'm sure you kind of do this exercise when you watch films like this, where you play out almost like within seconds where the story could go, right?
Yeah.
But then what's the stronger choice as far as the themes you're trying to explore and everything like that? And for this film, this story, like, you could have easily played it that this, you know, warning, spoiler if you need it, guys. This person comes back, but it's like Pet Cemetery. It's something's even more wrong. The other sister is never coming back, and then it just like ends like that. But the sort of way that you left it was like, maybe we should have talked this grief out together and we should have processed it better so that you wouldn't be like trying to like get rid of me. Like, but I feel like that the choice that you guys made, you know, a bigger studio would have made the like, you know, the Pet Cemetery choice, right? And they would have like ran with it. But the choice you guys made it so that someone can watch your film and be like, ooh, yeah, I really should have dealt with that grief in my life better. Because this is so
I think that Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that an idea that was like really interesting to us the whole way through, which was sort of the inverse of going in the Pet Cemetery direction, was the worst thing that can happen is that it works.
Yeah.
Right. And I think so many of these resurrections films really dance around like, how does it go wrong? How do they come back wrong? And so we really wanted to navigate a way to bring Jules back different, because she died and that's traumatic, and she was resurrected and that's traumatic. And, you know, she's been dead for a year and that's traumatic, or absence, or it's something different. Right. But she's not a zombie. She's not a monster, but she's also not the person he wanted back.
Yeah.
And she like never can be.
Yeah.
But it didn't go wrong, right? Like he got what he wanted.
Yeah.
And also kind of like leaning into, you know, thinking about the ending, you know, again, I think there's definitely variations in which like it stays permanent, or someone that was alive at the beginning of the film gets killed, you know. And I think there is something interesting about, you know, kind of ending the film, you know, where we began it, as far as like, you know, very similar image, but we live in the weight of what happened, even though it in theory has gone back to square one, right? But what has happened to Ava, what Jamie has done to Ava, what he's had to endure himself, like all that feels the grounded, realistic horror of it all. And I think that's another thing, like I'm really happy with a lot of like the grounded choices we made, even though we're living in a heightened, like, yes, we're dealing with black magic and kind of, you know, ritual and stuff like that. I feel like, you know, to your point, like another place I feel like the film always could have gone is like living with Jules not knowing she's in Ava's body, and you know that being a big reveal, but we hit that dead on, right? Because the twin would immediately look at her hands and be like, oh, this is so not my body, and it's kind of owning those moments, owning the reality of what an actual person would be going through if they were in that heightened, you know, if that were to happen to them, and be like, okay, so what happens next? Because that's the truth. Like we have to own that truth.
Yeah, and that speaks to another one of your works I've seen a few episodes of, which, guys, you should check it out. It's a show called Graves. And basically, it just speaks to me. I mean, we're from this generation that is, our era of growing up was like Buffy, and like, you know, if you watched any like British shows, like I used to watch like Mr. Bean and stuff, like absurd comedy. And we also like live in this, we have so much shit to complain about.
Totally.
So many neuroses, and I really enjoyed watching the few episodes I got to see of Graves. I'm gonna probably binge it all this spooky week, because I realized I've watched so many of those best horror movies lists. I'm like, I've seen everything.
You're out. Yeah.
But back to that, like, this is definitely something I think is interesting about the work that you've created, that I've seen, and the work that I know that you're creating, which is based on like actually dealing and putting to the plate what the shit is. And I feel like the generations before us, it was like spooky, ooh. But we're like, I am popping some pills. I've got issues. Like,
and then there's a ghost.
And there's demon. Yeah, I get it. I get it. There's a demon. Like, fine.
Like things are bad before the monsters show up. Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
You know.
That's such a perfect way to put Graves. Graves is such like, oh, and there's demons.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
That makes sense.
I mean,
well, there's actually this like great moment from the end of the first season, which I have no idea like what parts you've watched, but it's right after sort of they've all realized the demons are back because they fought the demons 10 years ago, where my character and Kate's character are talking about it, and we basically say like, that's bad. It's bad that the demons are back. But it's also like kind of cool because it's like a tangible thing to fight. It's like something to like train your life energy towards, rather than this like despondent depression and like you know, all of the things that go wrong in our world, that there's no clear way to fight. You know, that the demons offer like some amount of clarity and focus.
We're the era of like extreme apathy, because we've just been constantly traumatized. Like, you know, the boomers and everything got this amazing generation of like, ooh, you know, like some statistic was like they have like 20% they had 20% of the nation's wealth when they were our age that we are now, and we have like 2% barely. And
well,
so,
and I think
that even seems high.
that even seems like, where are these people?
And I think the other thing that goes into that, right, is like who's telling stories too, because I also feel like in that generation, right, that those statistics were like true for certain parts of that generation, but those were also the people who were like at the helm of storytelling on any like mainstream level. And so it's, the film industry and media is still very much like held by like a more elite class, but like there are avenues, right? Graves is this like little independent web series that's all online for free. Like definitely costs like money to make, but like it's, it's not like it's not a studio thing. And there is access to like,
it's fun. And like, there is a certain democratization that there is in indie film and like putting up things like web series, because you can just like, you can learn how to make yourself a storyteller. And we talked about some off the cuff stuff before the interview, which I won't really get into specifically, but like there are things that you can do right now to keep getting your voice heard and out there. And yeah, you're right, depending on whatever era of history we're in, we are paying attention to the people in power. And the difference is that now, technically, we all have the power to put our voices and to make sure that they get told and those perspectives get told.
Yeah.
So, and it's easier said than done. And it does require a lot of work and like marshaling of whatever resources you do have. Like, I think it's really easy to get into like a really romanticized version of it, but I also don't want to downplay how powerful it can be. You have to like walk that line.
Yeah.
And the things that are kind of invaluable from doing it, right, that don't actually cost money. I think I always say that, like, the script's free, like it doesn't cost any money to write a good script. It doesn't cost any money to like find good people that you want to work with.
It just takes a lot of your time and
energy. It just takes a lot of time. And yeah, I mean, Graves is such a perfect example of, something that people would probably or would advise me not to do many times, especially when we got to season
people
3.
People did.
Yeah, that's true. They really did. Graves was such like the most labor of love, and like started from a place of, I think the thing about web series that's unfortunate, and like I've been doing web stuff since like 2009, 2010, when people were like, wait, I have to watch it on the computer. I'm like, yeah. Here's the website. Like, I know. Graves was such kind of a labor of love that, web series, like there's not a lot of, you make a feature film and there's a lot more avenues for it as far as like festivals and recognition and distribution and stuff like that. Web series very much are just like, they go online, and like sometimes you get something out of it, but sometimes they just live online. But that never deterred me. Graves actually was really a response, in my opinion, to like years of like almosts, right? Like things that were like, oh, we almost got this thing we almost got a budget for this movie, we almost got this thing into this festival, and there was just like a series of like, just like, okay, it's not working out, let's just do whatever. Let's like celebrate failure in a way. And that's kind of how I felt. That's kind of the characters of, I mean, I went into the characters of Grave, but yeah, I feel like that kind of impetus of like, let's celebrate, not that nobody cares, but let's just celebrate that we can do whatever we want.
Well, and that like nobody caring shouldn't necessarily have any bearing on the work, right? It does make a difference as to like whether or not you make your budget back, and that's like a real consideration. But also like things are also worth doing because they're worth doing.
And I mean, there are so many people who they fall flat on their face because they make like maybe one decent short, it gets like 1 million hits, and then they're given the budget, right? And they do this big feature, and it literally sucks. So that, but that happens.
Hard. Yeah.
But I think it's good that, I mean, and you should take this as a compliment. It's good that you're like created content because you're investing in your future. Like whatever that was, like there are so many things that you learn more from mistakes or just working through stuff that you cannot afford to screw up when you finally get the thing you've been waiting for. Like when you finally get the studio's attention, when you finally get the big budgets, there are lessons that you cannot like learn suddenly. Like, and that's the problem with this business is, you know, my parents told me that this business, you know, they were thinking about acting specifically, but I'm on all sides of this. It's a tournament profession, which means that the people that are at the top are the only ones that are viewed as successful. So like A-list or like studio picture types. But when you redefine, I mean, you guys are constantly creating together. And so you're redefining that success, because if you're making stories that you want to make and you believe in them and they deserve your energy, then that's living the dream, no? You guys.
Yeah, like if you can find a way to do that sustainably, like.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
also
keep investing in it, you know?
Right. And also just like, you know, I think a big thing for us is, you know, like keeping the thing moving, keeping the train kind of moving, and completion. Yeah, I think, you know, there's something I'm so grateful that Christine and I very much have like a very similar attitude of like, okay, what's the next thing? What's the next script? What are the 8 things we have in development? And then like, yeah, and even going back to Graves, like, you know, with episodics and web series stuff, like I'm so thankful that we saw it through to the end. Like it's 3 seasons, it's a full story, like you can watch the beginning straight through the end. And like that is I think important. It really does like do something, I feel like, to your brain, because I know so many people that do toil away, you know, kind of at the same project, or you know, there's something stuck in whatever process of development, and then they feel almost stunted to, you know, they can't really move on. And I think I'm very grateful for my almost lack of preciousness with certain things. Like I think like I love the things that we've done, I love the things I've done in the past, but I also love that I move on in a year and a half, 2 years, whatever life cycle it has. It's always exciting. You know, I feel like every time Christine and I finish a film, whether it's writing it or like, really, I feel like it comes the most when we're back from set, is there is an immediate like, I want to do that again, but like better.
Well, I also feel like there's a really common thing where like a day or two before we start filming, I'll be sort of like having a leading conversation with him. He'll be like, wait, I'm sorry, are you pitching me on a new project right now?
We're on the subway one time, and I don't even know when it was.
It was in between the Tech Scout and the first day of principal photography.
Grave, like we're not even shooting Unquiet Grave yet. We're like days before we go, and
we're
feel
going
like
to
both on the
B&H.
subway, going to B&H, pick something up last minute because, you know, whatever. And I just remember like being like just drained, like just like, oh my God, how are we gonna do this? This is gonna be, I don't know, we have 10 overnights or whatever the hell. And then, you know, Christine's like, yeah, so, you know, and she just starts like slowly bringing up some old idea and how that would translate to film. And I had a moment, I was like, are you like literally pitching me another movie right now? And then the best part is when those times happen, it's always, she knows she has me, because then I go, yeah, well, you know, we could, and like whatever logistical thing, and I'm already like figuring out how to do that. And that's when.
I mean,
it's a real cycle, it's a pattern.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, I mean, this definitely is a film thing, but my mom always says that, you know, she had me, and then she was like at the doctor's office and she just saw a pregnant woman and she was like, kind of want to be pregnant again. Like,
yeah.
And it was just like, and then that's when my brother happened, you know, and it's kind of this thing where I hear you. I know that, what was it, like 5 years ago is kind of when I started my official filmmaking journey, where like I was like writing and collaborating with Clay very actively. And we have like, you know, this library of stuff that if we were given money, we'd be like, we can do all of these.
Yeah, just like immediately. Which script do you want? You want ghosts? We got ghosts. You want witches? We got witches.
Exactly. So we're ready. But I know that there was a point, there was like a 2-3 year tension where it had to be this one movie that needed to be made. You know, it was like,
Mm.
we worked so hard, and then we realized that, okay, well, that one would be so much more expensive. We don't have the experience. And frankly, like, anyone we've pitched it to thinks I'm too young for the role right now.
Oh
Okay,
yeah.
these are not actual problems, right? These are just like,
Yeah.
okay, well,
Just do it great in 5 years.
yeah. So it's like, okay, well, let me just like focus on other stuff. And the moment that we stopped having this, like, we have to do this movie, and then it was just like,
Mhm.
just keep creating, because there's
Mhm.
so much material that you can come up with. Even when you're about to shoot another movie, you would just be like, oh, actually, I see
Yeah.
this now. It's like a House episode, you know, or Sherlock Holmes, where it's like, you know, you're pouring your tea and then you see something in the tea leaf and you're like, oh yes, it must be blah, blah, blah. Like, you never know.
No, but I think that that's really common. And even Terrence, as you say, like that's a strength, is that like I do feel like we had to have that preciousness kicked out of us. You know, like I think
Yes.
that I think most filmmakers, I don't know, maybe most artists, like hit this place where they think they have the thing that's gonna be the thing,
Yeah.
and it falls apart.
Yeah.
And some people stop and some people don't. And right, like, but I think what we often don't talk about is the people who wind up making it, whatever that means,
Yeah.
usually did have that happen at some point and they just didn't stop.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
If not multiple times, right? Like,
Yeah, if not
if
just
not,
constantly.
I mean, yeah, that's definitely happened to me in the past. And also, like, you know, without getting into spoilers for our careers, you know, that's kind of that was also a very similar, you know, situation, was kind of the impetus for Unquiet Grave. We were in a very
Yeah.
similar, like, ooh, this is a fancy thing that we might get, and our roles in it were kind of in question. And yeah, it really forced us to kind of be like, what can we greenlight ourselves, what can we say yes to
Yeah.
ourselves, and what can we really do to like empower ourselves as writers, but then also like Christine as an actress and myself as a director. And so yeah, I think it happens.
McConaughey has his Green Lights book, and he's
Oh
been
yeah,
talking
just
about,
keep living.
yeah, just how it's so important to, you know, like, I get people ask me different advice for, like, you know, actors, filmmakers, whatever. And it's funny because whenever you get asked advice, you're like, am I someone that they think is an expert?
Yeah.
And whenever I answer, like, what advice you give to an aspiring filmmaker, actor, whatever, I always say, take that word out and just make it what it is. Like, you're a
Yeah.
filmmaker. Because the moment that you decide that that's what you want to do, suddenly you just go like, what would I need to do to be that? Okay, I need to have my headshots, or I need to make a film, or I need, and just, you end up doing it. You end up falling into the line of that role. And you guys just shot distress signals in like August, right? Like late summer.
Yeah.
And I was reading, I know you're still like in the kind of post-production mode, which is a murky place, and you're discovering it. But the synopsis reminded me of a film that I saw last year, or I don't know how many years it's been. It's just the pandemic. It's
There's
like,
no time. Yeah, there's
Body at Brighton Rock. I don't know if you
Mhm.
guys saw that, but it
oh
kind of
yeah.
reminded me, just like the kind of conceit of a standalone kind of hike situation. And
Yeah.
women going through that is so always interesting, because there's so many things you can explore. What was that like for you to just do something where you're like the special effect, right?
I'm gonna steal that. That's great. Yeah. Well, first of all, like that project really just came out of wanting to come up with something that we could do with the world as sort of unstable and unpredictable as it is. And we were just trying to come up with like the smallest project. And we were like, well, me lost in the woods is, you know, there's some inherent tension there. And we were actually originally talking about it for this spring, but some way, a couple weeks into the process, we were like, we could do this now. Like,
yeah, it was a very similar to the other story in which Christine was like, so I just watched Castaway. And, you know, I don't know, couldn't we do that? And then, like, you know, a week later, it's like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, actually, yeah, I think we could, and then
I-
a lot of things just kind of fell into place that, again, seemed crazy. And we were like, it was a very small, it's a 4-person crew, including Christine.
4-person operation, like,
Yeah, 4-person operation, and then, we quarantined, tested, and then went and lived together in the middle of Massachusetts. And, we had access to some really lovely, beautiful outdoor locations, and the whole film's outdoors. And yeah. So anyway, sorry, I jumped in, Christine. You were
I don't know. I love the Castaway story because it makes us sound so like pathologically confident. Like I'm like, oh, I watched Castaway. We could do that.
I can do what Tom Hanks does. Like, yeah.
I'm basically Tom Hanks.
Mhm.
I wasn't gonna say it because it's just so obvious.
Right.
But yeah.
But anyway, it was a really tremendous exercise in there's nowhere to hide. And it's funny because I feel like that's something we said about an Unquiet Grave, but it's even more true about Distress Signals. And for like anybody, like that was such a difficult script to develop. Like, how do you create tension moment to moment in a film with one person for most of it? And and I think a part of the reason why Castaway comes up is because they do it so effectively. And so it was such a great space to look at, like, okay, this can work, and like really dissecting not the specific story beats that they have, but why they work, and understanding like what it takes to like create stakes and tension and like rises and falls when all you have is like an environment and an actor. And then again, like as an actor, there's nowhere to hide in that. As a director, there's nowhere to hide in that. It's just, it's all you.
Yeah.
And I think also it was a good testament to, like, while it is most definitely a smaller production than Unquiet Grave, it really taught me what things are precious and what things are not, and what things actually, look, we're all, at the independent, low budget level. But I look at, what we were able to accomplish with Distress Signals at such a smaller scale than Unquiet, and I still see what I think will be a better film, or what I think will be a better story. And yeah, it's just really interesting. I feel like the more things you make, the more you realize like what matters.
Yes.
I feel like I sometimes do some like moonlighting for some college productions. Like I'll do like tech stuff, and I'll see the kids like looking at the DP's camera and be like, oh, that's the coolest camera I've ever seen. I'm like, yeah, they're all cool, yeah, they'll get an image, and it looks great, I guess, but I'm gonna get fired, but no, I think that, like, it's just the more you do it, the more you fail, succeed, whatever word you want to put in, the more you really realize like what matters as far as like engaging an audience member.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's a certain and I know what you mean. Like I've worked on all kinds of work that most people would not know that I worked on, because it's just, that's what pays the bills. At the end of the day, like you realize that there are some jobs that are gun for hire, and there's some jobs that are like, this is like my great grandpa's, gun, and like it means so much to me to use this, right? I don't know why I'm using guns in this metaphor.
It's a great metaphor.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I've been on sets where people are like waiting to get off the clock, or waiting to find out overtime's coming in. And then I've been on sets where they're like, this was 8 hours, even though it's 12 hours. This was 8 hours, right? We all agree? Okay, cool. Like, and it means more, and everyone is excited. And then even when you watch the movie, maybe the production value is not as much, but you're like, damn, they had fun making that movie. Like you can tell that there's a story,
And the process really does show up in whatever you have at the end of the day, in some pretty like profound ways. I had a teacher in college who talked about it as the invisible glue between the people that either is or isn't there on opening night. And like, obviously, like, films have like a final cut, but I think the energy is the same, right? Of like, if you don't invest in it early on, you can't put it in at the end.
No. And
I think and I think it's infectious, and I think it is to your point, like it really you know, I understand the burnt out attitude of a lot of sets I'm on, where people are just like, trying to get paid, I'm not getting paid very well, and here we are. What's the next shot? Like, I totally understand that attitude, because I understand how grueling it can be. But you know, you aspire to something a little bit more transcendent, and something a little bit more communal, and like a family being created. And yeah, I mean, like, I'm most proud of the moments when people are enjoying themselves, when people are not realizing what time it is, you know, like on Distress Signals, you know, we just our catch-all location manager, AC, sound guy, had a few lines in the film. You know, at one point at like 4 a.m., you know, out in the woods, he like comes to me, he's like, this is really cool, man. I'm like, you stare,
And
you're
I
okay.
think, and I think, to be clear, I think at that point he had been like gathering and like breaking apart trees for firewood for like 10 hours.
He was literally
Like,
keeping the fire going, literally and metaphorically.
we had a fire in the shot we were shooting that night, so he had to just like keep it blazing like the whole night.
Yeah, and that's beautiful. Like, that's great. Like, that's amazing. That
Literal indie spirit, which is why, like I say again, you guys, people's definition of success is so important to like their whatever their core contentness is. I don't want to say happiness. Happiness is just, it's whatever. But if you guys continue doing what you're doing, I gotta say you've been successful, because that's not going to change no matter what dollar sign is behind whatever project you're working on, is the sort of fulfillment. Because if you get people excited continuously, then it's always going to feel that way. And on that note, I wanted to ask you guys, what kind of message do you have for the universe? And, you know, what are you vibing with on this Halloween?
I've been I've been thinking about like generating, right? And like that there's generating something that's like so active, and we could always be, we're always generating something, right? That's like a part of just our existence. And I think especially with, you know, things in the world as they are, in the many ways that things are demoralizing or intense, and there's uncertainty about the future, I think it's so easy to like fall into generating like fear and suffering and all of those things. And I don't want to like advocate like generating like happiness in the face of those things, but I do think generating justice, generating empowerment, like thinking about like what can you do with what you're creating that isn't downward.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think similarly, I've been thinking a lot about like, you know, what's worth doing, and what is kind of the both in what we put out in the world and what we do for kind of ourselves. And I think that it's so easy for creation and art to not feel worthy, or to not feel like worth doing for yourself. And I think it truly is. And I think it's, you know, I don't know, it's interesting talking about graves, which I haven't thought about in a while. But, you know, that came from such a place of like, you know, there's a kind of self-deprecation, or kind of a like, this doesn't matter energy to graves, which is, you know, funny, and I love, and I have nostalgia for. But there's been an interesting shift in me of like, oh no, what if I actually took myself seriously? What if I actually believed in myself as a creator? And what if I actually believed in the people around me? And I think that that is worth doing. And I think that however you can, to Christine's point, empower people and support people and lift them up, because yeah, like great things can come, and good stories and good messages can come from that.
I 100% agree with you. I mean, I think that right now there's a crossroads where a lot of creators can either be clout chasing, or they can be creating something that may have a slow and steady impact on society. And it's a really tough place, because sometimes you need to clout chase in order to
Sure.
generate attention towards the things that matter. But if you focus hard on your intention, like you could just attract the right energy towards you, the right people that can make things happen. So, and it was really cool to see your film in Night Stream, which was such a intense experience. Guys, I don't know, it's like a weird thing where I'm like, do I want it to happen again? But like that means that
I know, right? There's this strange like, wait, but like, can Night Stream happen again even if the pandemic's over?
Just do the virtual bar thing, you know?
Yeah, the virtual bar was great.
The virtual bar was so funny. Like for those listening, watching, it was this weird thing where we were like 8-bit characters, and you would like run in, and if you're with a certain range of people, you would like see their Zoom screen pop up, and so you would like go in different rooms. It was so bizarre, but it made me realize, like, first of all, it was great to see your show, your film, and to like watch your show recently. And because the last time I saw you was like at a horror trivia, which was like this whole like thing, and it's
right before the pandemic. Like,
yeah, and like how wild it is that we kind of have to relearn how to be social with one another.
Mm-hmm.
And so, on that, I want to thank you guys so much for being my social interaction for the week, and for keeping me safe.
Thank you for having us.
Same,
Otherwise, I'm just yelling at my health insurance on the phone.
Who isn't these days?
Yeah, that's
my God.
People who don't have any.
Exactly. But thanks again for joining me. Thanks again for joining me on another episode of Chatting with Asta. And of course, thanks to my guests, Christine and Terence. It was so lovely talking to you about your work and beyond. And their message this week is pretty simple and complex at the same time. Generate, focus on what you're generating and focus on what you believe in. And good food for thought. Also, happy Halloween if you're watching this the week that it came out and was made. As well as, if you're enjoying this show, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and keep downloading. We're on podcast format as well. And yeah, I guess I'll see you when I see you. Thanks for joining.